Inshallah, now we cross over to Brother Faruk Hoosein, a director at Class Consulting. We say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Faruk.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I wish you well for this new year and for your program, and I hope you will continue to touch the lives and hearts of as many people as you possibly can. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, I suppose you're quite right. Let's begin.
As we know, you are in the Cape Town region, more relaxed part of the province of one of the provinces in this beautiful country. We look at matriculants exams of 2016. We see there is a slight increase compared to the year 2015. Your take on this, Brother Faruk?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's quite beguiling to think that because there has been this increase, that therefore, results are ostensibly better. But albeit the increase in results are within the internationally acceptable standard of 5% or just under 10%. And we see evidence of that in the excellent results of the Free State. Now, I've worked in the Free State, and I can tell you that they have a very strong systemic approach. Upstream, in other words, making teachers accountable, and downstream, in other words, making the officials also accountable to their clients, i.e. the schools and the teachers. So although the results have ostensibly improved, and we must bear in mind also that the scale of this project is also very, very, very big. Understand, of course, that there are some 7,000 exam centers, and that you have some 38,000 markers. So that already gives you an indication as to the inordinate expenses that the state has. And of course, the other thing that also impacts on results is the containment of this restless industrial army called the progress learners. And there were many, many progress learners that we had, at least more than 108,000 students who were progress learners, which implies by extension that they require an inordinate amount of support as well, because their academic literacy might not be as enriched, and their academic capital might not be as deep as students who are more test-wise, as well as being more test-prepared. So in answer then to your question as to whether results are good and whether the department should be commended, of course the department should be commended, and of course our hardworking teachers should be applauded. But it has to be seen in context. And remember now, many of our provinces do not have the requisite support systems in place for our educators. And also our educators are really overburdened. If you look at the so-called new curriculum, which is strongly topic-driven, and therefore there is an overemphasis on instruction and less on teaching, because there is a difference between instruction, because that's more on training, and teaching will allow for an exploration of habits of mind, ways of thinking, ways of seeing, and getting children to have a love for learning for the sake of learning, which in a deeper way implies that we might well be shooting ourselves in the foot, because we are overemphasizing the content, which is also important in any curriculum anywhere in the world. But the larger question is, we have a curriculum that is 1 inch deep and 1 mile wide. So we have a lot of content, but countries that have shown to succeed, where learners are more insightful and where learners are more creative, inventive, and ingenious, are those curricula where you have it as 1 mile deep and 1 inch wide. In other words, there's greater depth, and there's more time for exploration, and more time for reflection, and more time for asking larger questions around if this is how it is, how else can it be?
Gee, Faruk, looking at or talking about depth and the wideness of our education system, when we look at some of the comments that have been made specifically with regards to the upward adjustment of figures, does this give then a unfair or a fair reflection of our results when it comes to the quality of our Matric 2016?
Well, to be fair, we understand that our curriculum is a norm reference curriculum. In other words, because it's a high-stakes exam, taxpayers want to know how well the system is performing and how responsive is the system. So our system is a norm reference system. In other words, we compare one learner against another learner. We need to know how many 80%ers there are, how many distinctions there are, and how many people are at the bottom end, and how many people have fallen through the safety net. In fact, there have been several schools that hadn't even passed, where any of their learners passed. So that's quite revealing. So in that sense, the approach of the exam and the way in which we conduct exams in this country is internationally acceptable. And in fact, the upscaling or downscaling of marks is also, at the risk of repetition, a perfectly internationally acceptable practice. Where the bell curve will be adjusted accordingly. And remember now, there are certain strict criteria and scientific criteria that people use when the adjustment is made upward. It might be because the question levels of complexity might have been difficult. If marks are adjusted downward, it might be because the question levels might have been a lot easier than the year before, and the year before, and the year before. So it's a scale that's considered over a period of, say, 5 years, and therefore certain strict scientific criteria are employed in making an upward adjustment or even a downward adjustment. So in some ways, people are saying that the results are not a true reflection of what the learners had actually achieved. So yes, on the one hand, strictly and technically correct, but on the other hand, systemically, we are perfectly in our educational rights to adjust the marks accordingly, either upward or downward, which is not an excuse for learners having to rely on upward adjustment and use that as a justification for resting on their laurels. Effort, as you rightly alluded to earlier on, and intentionality will lead to the kind of output that you want. So learners, their core business, and teachers, their core business is to look at the quality of the input and the quality of the throughput if you want to have quality output as well.
Well, Faruk, you're giving us equations in the very starting of the year. So now let's look at maths and science. We know these are two subjects that are generally frowned upon. When you look at the over 717,000 learners that have sat down and have passed or who wrote the matric examinations for the year 2016, we see for maths only about 33,500 people getting over 60%. And for science, we see only around over 28,000 students getting over 60% for maths. When we compare that to ratios or proportionately, should we be worried?
Well, look, you are perfectly correct when you say that, you're asking the rhetorical question, should we not be worried? Of course we should be worried, and we should be worried more broadly about the quality of results, not just in maths and physical science, but we should be looking at the quality of results throughout the system, because habits of mind, ways of thinking, ways of seeing, and academic literacy is primary import if we want to have a workforce that can contribute productively. And if you're looking at the fact that 33,521 students or candidates got 60% or more for maths, But then when you're looking at physical science, you find that, again, 60% of the 28,000 and more of those candidates got 60% for physical science. There are fewer in physical science, and you've got to ask yourself the question, why? And so also there's a deeper thing that you've got to ask is that, is the subject maths being taught, and is the subject physical science being taught in a formulaic way, in a lockstep way? Now, of course, for mathematics, in order to enjoy discovery, and in order to enjoy exploration, and in order to enjoy an insightful aha moment in arriving at a solution, you've got to ask yourself again, is the subject being taught in a way that's more exploratory, in a way where it considers knowledge in transition, in a constructivist way, or is it just teaching science as a given body of knowledge and teaching maths as a given body of knowledge? Now, that's also a question that we need to ask. If at the lower level we are not getting it right to teach mathematics in a formulaic way and a lockstep way, then there must be something going awry with teachers perhaps not being prepared as far as the content goes, teachers not being prepared as far as the methodology of teaching maths and science is concerned. And that is why the most neglected species is the teacher in the equation of getting quality results. So yes, whilst there might have been more than 7,000 distinctions for physical science and more than 8,000 distinctions for mathematics, it's nothing really to crow about, because when you look at the overall number of more than 700,000, 800,000 who wrote and sat for the National Feeder Certificate Examination. And also another question to ask is, how many initially enrolled for schooling? In 2004, there were more than 1 million people. And now, at the end of Matrics, we only have about 700,000, and that's not even including the progress learners. And you can imagine the social strain we would have experienced if those progress learners were not contained in schools and provided with support. And I'm in favor of progress learners, but at the same time, I believe that it is then the department's duty to provide greater support for those learners and to spend a little bit more money. And we're not a penny halfpenny state. We have the money, but we need to siphon the money correctly and use it for teacher development and teacher training. That's one. And two, if you really want mathematics and physical science to improve, then more resources have to be put into it. And incidentally, this notion of having winter schools and September classes to support learners in order to get good results and sending learners to camps, that's a quick fix solution, but it's also dysfunctional rescuing. It's not really supporting the system, because teachers then, in an insidious way, will then say, there are these winter schools, and there's a spring camp where they can go to for classes, and then they put the brakes on their performance as well. So I think, for me, the overall results in maths and physical science, they in a polite way, they're not impressive at all. And especially when you consider the amount of resources that have been spent or misspent, and you've got to ask yourself, are these students then test prepared, or are they test wise?
That's a missing equation, or an equation that needs a concrete answer to it, or formula to it, Brother Faruk. We know we can discuss on many issues for a very lengthy piece of time. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Just two more things I want to touch on, Faruk. We know the battle that has been going on for years when it comes to boys versus girls. We see boys overshadowing the girls in the NSC exams for the year 2016.
Well, look, that's a very encouraging sign that, in fact, the girls are actually performing better. I would say that, more than 56,000 girls than boys wrote the 2016 exam. And so that's already a very clear indication. based again on what you said earlier on, intentionality is the most important thing, and to consider the place, value, and function of education. Consider also the first revelation in the final testament, the Noble Quran. Read in the name of the Lord that has created thee. Now that's an important concept, and it's 1400 years before the knowledge economy, and there must have been a reason for that. And so when you're looking at the research, it actually shows that girls have a stronger penchant for reading and for research and for wanting to know more. We find that in this exam, the 2016 exam, that 74% of the boys passed the exam compared to 71% of the girls who passed the exam. So that's something else to counterpoint, the suggestion that the girls are excelling more than the boys. So I just wanted to put that in perspective. But although the pass rate, the national pass rate is for 2016 is 72% and more, technically it was actually 70%. So there are, that's of course excluding the progress learners. So although the results with adjustment had gone up to 76%, of that figure we have to look at how many of the girls had in fact passed. And as you rightly suggested, yes, more girls than boys had in fact passed. Yeah.
Finally, Brother Faruk, when we look at the year 2017 going to be starting for the learners on Wednesday morning, what steps and guidance can you give to learners and teachers for the examinations for the year 2017?
Well, for me, students have to learn not just their content, they have to learn to be test-wise and not just test-prepared. Now, to be test-prepared means that you have to know your content. Anyone can do that. But to be test-wise, it means you have to know how to read examination questions. You have to know the levels of difficulty, and you have to know the levels of complexity. When it comes to the levels of complexity, you have to know how many problem-solving steps are being requested in that question, and at what level of depth or and breadth you are being asked to supply evidence. So the learners have to be taught how to generate the evidence for various types of questions, depending on the levels of difficulty, which is different to the levels of complexity. Levels of difficulty has got to do with, is this a question where the command verb says list, or does the command verb say evaluate? If it says evaluate, it means it requires more thinking processes. Levels of complexity means levels of problem-solving steps. And I would say to teachers, and in fact this morning, one of our top schools in the area, the Al Ghazali College, under the stewardship of Mr. Ustad Salih Khan, have requested the services of Class Consulting to train their teachers on creative methodologies and lesson planning. Now that already indicates that school is a winning school. And because the tires are hitting the road and full pistons are firing away on day one already. And so I would suggest that teachers have to plan the 5 Ps. They have to know that the proper planning prevents poor performance. In fact, I would say 6 Ps. Proper planning prevents poor performance. You have to plan the lesson correctly and ask yourself, what is it that the learner has to know, do, value, and be like, and what is it that they must achieve in order to master or be competent at that topic as a whole. I am mindful that this country, the curriculum is overloaded. And I think teacher unions must actually ask government to reduce the amount of content, and teachers have to be educated, and teachers have to be trained, and teachers have to be taught in terms of assessment skills. Remember now, our assessment is assessment for, as, and on the learning. We only teach people how to be competent in terms of assessment on the learning. But the other important areas is teaching teachers and training them as assessment for learning and assessment as learning. That's a whole debate that one can go into some other time. But I think teachers need to be properly equipped. Board of Governors need to actually spend a little bit more money qualitatively on equipping their teachers. We spend an inordinate amount of money on beautiful buildings, but remember now that the first revelation took place in a cave or outside of a cave, and so that should be a metaphor of our approach to education, that our focus should be on quality and not just quantity.
Brother Faruk Hoosein, Director at Class Consulting, Jazakallah once again for joining us this morning and granting valuable insight and input when it comes to the matric exams of 2016 and for the year ahead for students and learners alike for the year 2017.